We say that this project is, it sits at the intersection of academia and activism. It's really easy to look at the atrocity of it, but when we look at agency and resistance, that is very empowering. And it reflects on kind of what we're dealing with today, as we're still in a civil rights movement.
The present is the product of the past. So we have to understand, we cannot understand today without understanding the past.
I think a lot about the Toombs family.
The Sonoma County Journal, March 1858. Enticed away, we learned that a Negro woman, the mother of several children, living with a Mr. Toombs at Healdsburg, having been enticed away from his employ by some of her people, Mr. T and friends have notified the colored population of that burg that they must leave town within 10 days or abide the result.
You kind of have hot spots where this is happening, and if we look at the timeline of enslavement, right, which really starts with the Spanish Empire, and then that going on with the Russians and the Mexicans and this whole rancho system, there's not one town in the county that didn't have one of these rancho estates on it. So when we look at specifically the indigenous community being impacted by that, it's pretty much widespread. It's also a free state, right? So although you have the Fugitive Slave Act and you have many different loopholes for allowing slavery to flourish, people aren't really, it's very rare, right, that somebody would actually use that term slave.
You see servant often, you'll see cook, you'll see laborer, like very general terms, again and again and again in this record.
Who was Mr. Toombs? Who was this woman? And I hoped she got away. So I started with census research. That's when I figured out who the enslaved woman was. Her name was Ellen, and she was listed in the household, and she had children living in the household. And they were described both as, some of them were described as black, B for black on the census, or M for mulatto.
There are children that appear with the same last name, but the only man around is the master, is the trafficker.
The black side of the Toombs family, they're listed as laborers and domestic in the same household. They still have the same Toombs last name as the other children, who are listed as son or daughter. He was not shunned for having African children in his household, working as laborers. He was respected and accepted in this community.
I think about that practice of rape and that reality of having children that are yours but not entirely yours, and that being exported out here to California.
Did she get away? She was in the household in 1860, so it suggests that she was intimidated. And this newspaper article was true. There was a threat to the African American community for trying to tell her that she was free and that she shouldn't have to stay with that family. There are a handful of black people living in Healdsburg at the time, and at least two of them had already been involved in helping someone escape.
She did come back. We don't know what happened. But that harboring her is an act of resistance. Colored conventions happened all over the country except not in the South. Free black men who prospered within the economy of the time. So here we have John Richards and George Miller, who were both barbers, and being a barber is a great job for information, communication, and community building. And they were delegates to these colored conventions. They said there are 26 slaves in Sonoma County. They were only talking about African Americans.
She was there in the 1860 census, still with the Toombs family. She's there in the 1870 census, still living with the Toombs family. That's where it gets confusing, because in 1875, William Toombs, the patriarch, dies, has a heart attack, and there's a big, long obituary. Interestingly, Ellen is not listed there. My hope is that Ellen got away. My fear is that Ellen didn't get away and died quietly on the ranch and did not get an obituary, did not get a funeral, but I don't know for sure.
There's some murky things around the history with the matriarch of the family saying, well, if you stay and work with me until my death, then you might have part of my estate. But then the daughter of the matriarch continues to keep them. So that to me really points to coercion and possible bondage going on post-emancipation.
Ann Toombs, the mother, the matriarch, white matriarch, she left Sarah Toombs to Serena in her will. It was framed as that Serena would be the guardian of Sarah. Well, then when you look in the census and when you look in newspaper articles, Sarah was living with Serena as a servant. So not as a sister, as a servant. In 1913, Serena was late at night reading in bed, and she accidentally knocked the oil lamp on her bedside table. The lamp tipped over and the flaming oil spread out all over her bed and caught her bedclothes on fire. And the poor woman was engulfed in flames. Sarah ran upstairs trying to put out the flames. Couldn't, the whole room had caught on fire. Sarah ended up jumping out of the window, surviving, but was hurt. And Serena passed away in the fire. Sarah was alone, no family to support her, and she ended up finally getting away from Healdsburg, and she moved to Berkeley, where she met someone and married. She had 20 years of freedom away from the Toombs family and on her own in Berkeley. She died in 1932, and she's buried here in Healdsburg at the cemetery.
I wonder what actually happened, and I think that's what's so engaging and also maybe maddening about this project, is that we can never fully find every single detail about every person, but when you get a little tidbit, it's so exciting. I came to this project by just wanting to understand what had happened here, because there was a level of racism that was so deep here. When I first got here, I saw Confederate flags everywhere. The police were, heavy-handed to say the least. And I just felt like something happened here and I needed to know what it was. And I was digging and digging and digging, and I found a couple of early works where I saw some of the first mentions of black folks, free black folks coming on the westward overland trails, as well as enslaved folks, like John Grider, who was at the Bear Flag Party in Sonoma. And I thought, well, why doesn't anyone want to talk about this? Or people would say he didn't exist. There was really a narrative here that people were very invested in maintaining. And I wanted to crack that. In 2020, I was asking the county clerk assessor if they had any records related to racially exclusive real estate practices. And they produced Samuel Shattuck's emancipation document. The door opened. There's a story here, but we needed collaboration. We needed somebody who worked in academia, who worked in research and understood what it meant to actually do research within the archives. It was refreshing and a reminder to me to have partnership with Amy, because this is our history. This is all of our history, and we're all responsible for it.
To ally with Demetra and this organization and community, and to really understand that there's present work being done, and there are lives affected by learning this history.
The people step forward that want to do this work, and you, Dr. Kit, want to do this work and stepped forward, and so therefore you're the right person to do it, and that's how we get free, step by step. With regard to the work of NAACP, the erasure of Black Americans in this county, not just the history but the current conditions that people have dealt with generationally, is pretty extreme. We were not counted in the portrait of Sonoma. We were told that we are statistically insignificant. So, there's about 10,000 black folks here. So that's like telling the town of Cotati, you guys don't matter. So our coalition fought and lobbied to make sure that we were counted in the portrait of Sonoma. And lo and behold, what we end up finding is that black folks live 10 years less than any other racial or ethnic group in the county of Sonoma. And the impacts are huge with regard to the lack of home ownership, employment, educational attainment, and so on and so forth. I feel like we can draw a line between this history of slavery, segregation, disenfranchisement, redlining, etc., the fact that folks weren't able to challenge anything in a court of law, the fact that we had an exodus of black folks from this county because of the violence and because of the conditions. I posed the question, does that have something to do with these data points that we have now? I think that there's probably a lot of students that maybe think there is no black history in Sonoma County, and there is. There's such rich black history. Looking at, these entrepreneurs like John Richards and George Miller and Mary Ellen Pleasant. Most people don't know that a black woman who was an abolitionist built and designed, a New Orleans style home on 900 acres, which she purchased. People don't know that. And it stands there today in Glen Ellen. People don't know about Samuel Shattuck. They don't know about John Grider being present at the Bear Flag Party. And that's why we want the plaques and the statues because to know your history is so important. And so that's really what I want to do. I would love if this project could become curriculum. We're still in the civil rights movement right now, and it's all hands on deck. Every act of resistance matters. Every act of kindness matters. And that's what we have to lean into. Join NACP, which is the oldest organization in the county working on anti-racism and racial justice. Join MECHA, join a BSU, join these organizations that are out there doing this work and get connected, because isolation is the goal of the folks that are in power. And we know that community is the antidote to isolation. So
yeah,
get involved. Let's get this done.